and turned the gun on himself. 2 students in the classroom were also hit by gunfire. They were taken to the hospital where one has since died. He was identified as 8-year-old Jonathan Martinez. The other child was not identified, but officials say he is in stable condition. Authorities are now searching Anderson's properties for any clues for a possible motive.
All too often, these things happen, and it seems to be a more familiar story. We're going to take it on with a frequent flyer guest on Live from Seattle, Dr. Alex Del Carmen. He's a law enforcement tactician. He's executive director of the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice and Strategic Studies, and he is our guest today. Dr. Del Carmen, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, again, all too familiar a story once again. Domestic violence, it seems, and we don't know the motivations yet, extending beyond that to the lives of these special education children in an elementary school. Horrible.
Absolutely. It's a horrible act, and unfortunately, violence has no standard as to who the victim is going to be. And as horrific as it is that children are involved, special ed children in particular, when you have people that are irrational, that are violent, and that have the motive of hatred behind what they do, it doesn't matter who that victim is going to be.
No, indeed. What do we know about this shooting as of last check?
Well, we know right now, what we really know is that we don't know a lot, in the sense that, you know, these investigations take a great deal of time, and of course, you know, what's happening right now is investigators are tracing back all the footsteps of the suspect and all of the footsteps of the victim to find out exactly, well, what were the motives. Typically, there's more than one motive involved, and also, you know, how could this individual, you know, equip himself with a weapon. You know, exactly what was the motive behind it or motives behind it. How did he go about doing it? Were there other people that assisted in this particular violent act? So all of those questions are being answered, and so it is an ongoing investigation at this time.
At this time, we don't think that this is yet, and that's the first thing in people's mind, whether it's reported or not, some kind of extremist kind of terrorism, that kind of thing. We don't have any reason to believe that it is, do we?
Not at this time, but then again, you know, I often say to people, because we don't label it a terrorist act or because we don't put it in a particular category or box, it doesn't take away the tragedy, and it doesn't take away, you know, the awfulness of the act, right? So, but what we do know right now is that, no, I mean, this is not a crime of hatred where it would be, you know, we would have sort of the hate crime component attached to it or some sort of a, perhaps even a terrorist act at this point. We just think this is simply a domestic violence act, as it is often the case, unfortunately, in those acts that they escalate the level of violence and result sometimes in somebody's death.
As a law enforcement tactician and someone who is key, you're involved in criminology and criminal justice. Why is it? I mean, and this is the question we often ask, why? But why is it that when we see these violent acts, that they often extend, even in this domestic violence, if this were just domestic violence, it extends beyond just the home? Why? Why schools, of all things? Why schools?
Well, you know, I mean, I think, first of all, the home is, you know, the Supreme Court justices in the past have actually called it and referred to it as the sanctity of one's home, meaning the fact that you are meant to be safe and feel secure in your home. I don't think that's any different from our schools, where learning can take place, where people that go to school, both teachers as well as students, you know, should have an expectation of safety, of an environment that is conducive of learning. Having said that, I think what we see in these domestic violence attacks, it is oftentimes, and the research supports it for the past 20 to 30 years, is we see an escalation of violence. We see that the individual perhaps hits the victim one time, then he goes through the cycle of making up and promising that he's going to do better, A few weeks later, the same thing happens, but perhaps it escalates to using a weapon or threatening her life. So, and more often than not, we see that these indicators rise to a level that result in somebody's death. And so we do take domestic violence very seriously in criminology.
And we should, and we absolutely should. What do you think is good advice for those who are listening? I mean, this is an isolated incident, but we do see this again all too often. We're talking about the school shooting in San Bernardino. What are maybe some things that we as the general public should keep in mind? We do have great law enforcement. You're trained. You know what you're doing, but there is a time between when you're called and when an incident happens. What should we keep in mind?
So I think what's really important is, first of all, is to be aware of your surroundings. I think we really find ourselves going through a routine on a daily basis. We get up, we take the kids to school, we go to work, and oftentimes we go through the same pattern. We see the same sorts of people at the school, and we just absolutely assume that this will never happen to us, and either our children are going to be surrounded by it or affected by it, or that we are going to be exposed to it. So I think it's important when these incidents take place, as you're doing in your show today, is to simply stop and reflect and figure out that this stuff is happening, and it is around us, no matter where we live, no matter where our kids go to school, no matter where we work. We are bound to be exposed to it or know someone's been affected by it. So it's important to be aware of those surroundings, and if it looks weird, if there's something that doesn't fit the pattern, be cautious and call 911, call the authorities. Don't get directly involved, but get those professionals to come to place and take care of business.
I love that you remind us of that, because it could be nothing, and people feel bad if there's nothing and I'm overreacting. But really, the only time you're going to have someone rolling their eyes at you for calling 911 is if you do it every single day. If you're calling 911, like the boy who cried wolf, that does not happen very often. And you being aware of your surroundings and being careful, you can never, ever go wrong.
Right. So in my business, we call that situational awareness. And the idea is just to simply not only be aware of it, but also report something that may not necessarily fit the pattern of what you're used to seeing. These types of events, and I'm not casting blame on anyone, but the reality is that someone close to the offender here, someone close to the shooter, may have known, may have seen signs, may have seen the escalation of violence, and at some point was reluctant to report this for one reason or another, perhaps loyalty to the shooter, perhaps they were scared to do so and feel that they were overreacting. And look at us now, lamenting over the loss of life.
Indeed, and that's why we're taking it on today as a reminder of the times that we live in. Dr. Alex Del Carmen, thank you so very much. It's always a pleasure. I appreciate your time on Live from Seattle.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure.